Our next speaker is Seth Patrick Hart. That's a great middle name, y'all. He is currently pursuing a PhD in Theology and Science at Durham University and is a recipient of the Durham Doctoral Studentship. Prior to this, Seth was a Clarendon Scholar at the University of Oxford, where he completed a Master's of Studies in Science and Religion under Alister McGrath. He also has a Master of Arts in Theological Studies at Regent College in Vancouver, a Master's of Strategic Ministry from Johnson University, and a Bachelor of Arts in Christian Ministry from Ozark Christian College. And our friend Seth will be talking about Teilhard and the Transhumanists. Let's give it up for Seth.
Thank you, everyone. Am I on? So, my talk is called Teilhard and Transhumanism, and the original subtitle was a critique of atheistic transhumanism. So, being transhuman, you're always about being ahead of the curve, and of course I am, because I get to be the grumpy old man of the conference complaining about people. So in 2017, just a couple years ago, Yuval Noah Harari, who's already been mentioned in this conference, released a book called Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow. Now in it, he begins to speculate wildly about how the future might look, and he goes one direction and another, but where he really lands on is that religion, the concepts that we bring to the world, are very important for shaping where the future goes. So of course the question becomes, what is the religion of the future? To which he says, it is dataism. Dataism, he says, while the religion of today is humanism, where we worship ourselves, and that has dominated Western culture, in the future we will worship data, data flows, and our religion will be centered around that. And he identifies one individual in particular who exemplifies this in the current day. The religion of the future is exemplified in Ray Kurzweil, who is famous for saying, when asked, does God exist, he replied, not yet. You see, for Kurzweil, the entire universe is shaped by the process of evolution. Not just biological evolution, but evolution on a grander scale, from simple to more complex. To quote him, he says, evolution moves towards greater complexity, greater elegance, greater knowledge, greater intelligence, greater beauty, greater creativity, and greater levels of subtle attributes such as love. In every monotheistic religion, God is likewise described as all of these qualities, only without any limitation. Infinite knowledge, infinite intelligence, infinite beauty, infinite creativity, infinite love, and so on. Of course, even the accelerating growth of evolution never achieves an infinite level, but as it explodes exponentially, it will certainly move rapidly in that direction. So evolution moves us inexorably toward the conception of God, although never quite reaching this ideal. We can regard, therefore, the freeing of our thinking from the severe limitations of its biological form to be an essentially spiritual undertaking. A spiritual undertaking. It is a religion. Even the book that I'm quoting from, The Singularity is Near, draws allusions to the kingdom of heaven is near, quoting, of course, Jesus Christ. So, if I were to summarize his view, in a world without the divine, human destiny is divinity. Now, it's an interesting prospect. Now, what he fails to acknowledge, and what many transhumanists fail to acknowledge, is the genetic relationship transhumanism has to one particular thinker, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, the Jesuit priest and paleontologist. Even the word transhuman itself, as far as we can tell, may have originated with him. Eric Steinhardt has even said that most transhumanists, without knowing it, work within the intellectual architecture, the conceptual architecture that Teilhard de Chardin has erected. And yet they do so without knowing it. Nick Bostrom, in his detailed history of transhumanism, only gives Teilhard de Chardin one passing mention. So let me show you a little bit of Teilhard's model. Teilhard's model in the book, The Human Phenomenon, extrapolates evolution outward. He says that the course of evolution occurs beginning at creation to the point where we are, in a series of concentric loops of radiation and then convergence back on itself, always going towards higher and higher complexity. So of course, because of this, technology is the forefront of evolution. Moreover, of course, since he was a Jesuit priest, he didn't just see this as some sort of natural workings of humanity itself. This was divine. This was God drawing all things into himself. And the culmination point, the omega point, as he called it, would be ultimately God revealing himself, completing the work of humanity and unification of humanity as a whole with the divine nature. Sound familiar? Because within this, you can see even Ray Kurzweil's 6 epochs of humanity. Even Yuval Noah Harari, to bring him back, his 4 stages of human history also has this sort of radiation and convergence that you see. Now, again, I'll assert that that Teilhard's framework is exactly the framework that most transhumanists work with. It is Teilhard's framework, and it has, through cultural and intellectual diffusion, sort of permeated all transhumanist thought since then. But the difference is, of course, with the atheistic transhumanist model, is that there is no divine center. What I love about the Christian transhumanism is the fact that transhumanism originally was Christian, which is why I'm really glad to go after the last talk, because transhumanism was originally a Christian concept. And now what is on offer now is 2 different models. You have the atheistic model, which offers the Ubermensch, the Nietzschean Ubermensch, where humanity pulls themselves up by their own bootstraps, or alternatively, you have the Christian model, which is modeled after Christ. Both see an evolutionary process whereby humans eventually culminate in divine unity with the divine. And I want to ask you the question, which model works? Which model is the better model? Now, as much as 4 minutes will offer me, I plan to at least bring up the discussion and say the best model is the Christian one. And I want to do so with the 3 theological virtues, which then nicely fit into faith, hope, and love. Now with faith, I'm asking, what do we actually believe? What is the metaphysical model that grounds each system? For Teilhard de Chardin, it was God. God was the telos, the divine telos, the end point through which all creation was striving. It made sense of progress. It made sense of a universe that seems to be striving up ever and ever upward. Now I ask for Ray Kurzweil and like-minded thinkers, what is the motor of progress? Why do we live in a world where we see things progressively going up and up and up, into ever more complexity and cerebralization? Well, there's no explanation often given. It's sort of taken as a fortuitous fact about the universe. The closest I could come is when he offers Lee Smolin's idea about black holes generating new universes and for a form of natural selection at the universal model. Unfortunately for him, since then, those models have since been debunked. So we're left with progress as an aspect, as an element of the universe. That's not an intrinsic law of nature. It just so happens that to be a fortuitous accident, that we live in a universe that tends to go towards more progress. But there's no reason to believe this will continue in the future. So without the proper faith, we don't have proper hope. What hope do we have that the future will be somewhat better, that progress will continue? Now for Kurzweil, this is just a generalized hope. Now since 2005, the threats of global warming, environmental destruction, and of course nuclear war, that hope can sometimes be put to the test. This is why Michael Burdett has said, and I quote, "The apocalypticism incites a central mood of most transhumanists convey, and that is anxiety." Kurzweil himself takes 250 pills a day, he says, on the hope that by the 2040s he will be able to upload his consciousness and live forever. Now, as 2040 edges more and more close, that seems less and less like a possibility. Of course, it could happen, but it's always a mood of anxiety. Whereas with Teilhard's model, because it is grounded in the motor of progress and grounded ultimately in God, it provides us with an actual hope. There is no fear of death, even though death is the final enemy to be defeated. And finally, I think the theological virtue of love. Without the metaphysical framework to ground a good faith, a good hope, what motivation do we have for an ethic of love? Now, for Kurzweil, he tries to ground his ethic of love in his metaphysic. This is what we should be striving for, an ethic of love, building up towards divine, increasing technology so that we too can participate in this. But again, with these critiques in place, it's difficult to truly ground this. Teilhard de Chardin, on the other hand, says this: if you do not have a divine purpose, a divine mind behind every single action, unless you know that your actions are truly working towards something of ultimate meaning, you will not have the motivation to do that, or at least not the same sort of motivation. To quote him, "That being so, everything which diminishes my explicit faith in the heavenly value of the result of my endeavor lowers irremediably my power to act." This ethic of love further provides a vision of a future and our technological ambitions. David Grumman, who's a Teilhard scholar, outlines this vision in 2 steps for Teilhard. It's respect for the things produced and for the personality of the people producing them. So, when it comes to this, when it comes to the 3 theological virtues, faith, hope, and love, if we're to find a religious model to ground transhumanism on, I propose Teilhard is better. A more realistic model, I think, for atheistic transhumanism is offered by Sir Martin Reith. And in his book, Our Final Hour, he asks the question, what are the odds we actually make it out of the century? And the odds he put it at? 50%. Now imagine living with that, because I do believe that's a more realistic vision if we operate under an atheistic model. We have a 50% chance of making it out of the century. And only then can we begin to start wondering whether or not we can begin to have a transhuman future. So my question to you is, if you believe that human destiny is truly divine, which model provides a better religious framework to which to operate on? Now I'd like to end on a couple of quotes from Teilhard himself, because I think he summarizes this best. "Successors to Israel, we Christians have been charged with keeping the flame of desire ever alive in the world. Men of little faith, why then do you fear or repudiate the progress of the world? Why foolishly multiply your warnings and your prohibitions? The greater man becomes, the more humanity becomes united with consciousness of and mastery of its potentialities, the more beautiful creation will be, the more perfect adoration will become, and the more Christ will find, for mystical extension, a body worthy of resurrection." Thank you.